Yeah, so many people are like, why don't you do some M cars, some M2s, some M5s? Nah, I got the X4. What else could you want? Let's take a look. You just got done having a look at the exterior, and I'm going to show you even more for two reasons. One, I've had a few complaints that says I don't show enough of the exterior of the vehicle. So I'm trying to find creative ways to show you that. Here you go. The second part is I really don't want to look at the exterior of this thing too much because I think it is difficult to put my eyes on it. And I thought there's no human way that anybody would be attracted to this car until I started driving it around and I had people pull up next to me and point and give me the thumbs up, which I thought was strange. But clearly they're doing this as an experiment, probably to just put out another vehicle, but also to have something that is slightly different. I find there is just a strange disconnect between the ride height, the front design, and the rear. It just, to me, it doesn't look like it was designed by the same person. But if you're someone that likes this, I can tell you it definitely looks different. But let's get done with that and talk about the interior of this BMW X4. It's very much like the X3. Now this has the darker red interior and the aluminum trim, which I think is one of the best combinations I've seen in, well, a more affordable BMW, and that's not particularly affordable at $50,000. But it's a good mix of elements between kind of the shiny textures, the matte, the metals, the alloys rather, and the leather. I like it. And pretty much everything in here works as you would expect. The infotainment is one of the best available, and I said this a lot. They've had the longest amount of time in terms of development. They had a huge jump start. They did it from the start properly, and now it's even better. The gesture control is gimmicky, but it works. The speed of which the interface is used is great. You have a giant rotary knob that everybody's copied. Your physical buttons are practical and easy to use. And your menu structure is simple until you get deeper into the menus and it gets more confusing. But I find that really everything that I want to use is right in front of me. And I love it. I wish this was in more cars like this. They should license this out. It's that good. Your gauge cluster is digital. Your steering wheel controls are pretty good, although I don't like how you do the track selection. You kind of have to roll this thing and then select it, but there are physical controls for the track selection and you can use the infotainment, so it's hard to complain about that. The paddles feel pretty solid. They're a little plasticky, but not bad. The HUD works great. Overall, this interior space is super comfortable. The seat adjustability is good. The headrest adjustment's good. The cargo capacity is compromised, but it's okay. It's just like, to me, it's a glorified hatchback. It's a hatchback on stilts with a weirder body design, and I think that's what most people are going to buy this for. But let's get into the nitty-gritty, since if you want more details, look at the X3 video. It's almost identical to this. Let's take a look at the underbody and see what that is all about. As the winter drags out, so do the SUVs and trucks. But that's not what this is. It's a Sports Activity Coupe because it's more aerodynamic, more sporty, all the things that you see in the marketing. But what is it really? It's a little bit longer and wider than an X3, and it looks nearly identical to the X3 as well. So, what you have here is an extremely smooth underbody. You have air curtains in the front. You have an active shutter grille to help with aerodynamics again. And pretty much the whole way back, this is definitely one of the smoother vehicles you'll see. But they have something nice here that more manufacturers should do. They have a little twist plug here in the aero cover to get at the drain plug so you don't have to unscrew anything or drop any panels, which is really nice. When you look at the front suspension, or the suspension in general, everything here is all aluminum. Your lower control arms, you have dual lower control arms, a split design. Your knuckle design is all aluminum all the way to your upright where you have standard struts. Now this is the M Sport suspension, so it's gonna ride a little bit more firm, but it's not active. There's no motors on it. There's no electronic adjustment of the suspension at all, which is makes it a little bit more simple to probably own in the long run. But other than that, let's get to the back of the vehicle before you pass out. In the back half of the X4, we're gonna see much of what we did in the front. More aerodynamic treatments. The covers smooth airflow to these huge lower control arm covers that direct air out the back of the car. Even the rear muffler design helps with that. And the point is to reduce drag, which improves fuel efficiency and can improve NVH as well. And speaking of that, you have an isolation damper on the muffler mount where it's mounted, so you don't have the vibration from the exhaust. There's one of those also on the front struts. Now, the suspension design for weight reduction, you have an aluminum knuckle here, an aluminum upper control arm, everything else is stamped steel, including the subframe carrier. Now, despite what you may think, BMW does have a huge stake in North America and America. This is made in South Carolina, like pretty much all of their other SUVs. Now, they make about 3,800 of these a month in South Carolina, but they are leveraging their North American supply chain because you can see made in Mexico stamped on their half shafts, their struts and shocks, and some of the other suspension components. And, this is all to reduce cost as well. Now, this does have all-wheel drive standard, and people are infatuated with having all-wheel drive on pretty much everything, whether you need it or not. But instead of talking about all this, let's get it out on the road and see how it drives. So what is it like getting behind the wheel of the X4? Well, it's a lot like getting behind the wheel of the X3 because so much of it is similar. But you're going to want to know what the differences are, so let's cover that. There's some serious pros and cons about the X4's performance and pretty much all of its driving dynamics, and I'm going to cover the first thing, that is ride quality. And I have to say, it's a combination factor. It's the run flat tires, and it's the overly stiff suspension that does not have any adaptive settings. This thing rides way, way too firm for what it is. They're trying to get you to feel like you're driving this sporty SUV coupe or whatever the hell they want to call it, and it just doesn't work. I mean, if I want a sporty coupe and I want stiff handling, I'll get a 4 Series, I'll get an 8 Series, I'll get an M car. I don't want it on this bigger hatch platform. And I feel like for that 2% of times where you're gonna drive this thing more aggressively, like in some corners, the ride quality trade-offs are just not worth it. And I think that's my biggest problem, and I think that's what most people are gonna complain about. Now, in this environment right now, it's really cold, the pavement's bad, and when the shock oil or the shocks get cold too, the ride gets a little bit even more firm, but even that withstanding, it should be far softer than it is. On to the next thing, and obviously that is the biggest problem for me, but there are some really good things, and that is BMW uses a variable gear ratio steering rack, which means that it's not a gimmick. A lot of manufacturers, what they do is they give you an electronic power steering rack that when you go into the different drive modes, it just makes the steering weight feel heavier, almost synthetically. With a variable gear ratio steering rack, in normal mode, it's slower to turn in. It doesn't have that instant immediacy. And if you're driving on the highway, sometimes you don't want twitchy steering. But the system is capable of when you go into the sportier modes, when you go into sport, then it can adjust the ratio where it's quicker to turn in. And I like this a lot. It makes it a lot more usable than a lot of the similar systems. And of course, this costs more to implement. But they do a great job tuning it, and I feel like the drive modes make that system more usable. So steering's a pro. Now let's get into one of the best things that BMW does. The transmission performance is remarkable. Their ZF8 speed has the best programming pretty much of any modern car in an affordable price range. And one of the reasons why is they understand how to program the torque converter. They understand how to get this thing going. Whether you're upshifting it manually, downshifting it manually, or just in fully automatic mode, this thing is always good. And the best part is they include paddles and they include a true manual mode where it will hold revs, it won't auto upshift, it downshifts so quickly with the rev matches. It's a true automated manual, and then when you're in automatic mode, it is smooth and good all the time. It doesn't need the 2 extra gears like a lot of companies are trying to pack in, and that's a big deal. And I think this is one of the biggest selling points of BMW cars is the transmission. Now, let's get this thing off the line. And this is one of the negative parts about this car, so let's just do it. In drive, I'm going to put it in sport mode and just peg the throttle. So, here's my problem with it. This is BMW's global turbo 4-popper, and it is a SUV motor. And if you don't know what that is, it's designed for the ultimate in efficiency for emissions and fuel economy. They need to put this in as many vehicles as possible to meet those regulations. So you get the typical string of what you get on 4-popper turbos, except this is a twin scroll. When you accelerate, it feels almost like a V6 because it makes so much torque between about 1400 RPMs to about 4800 RPMs. So it really has this sense of pull. But the big issue I have is off the line. This thing is dead off the line, and I have to constantly inject myself into a heavier flow of traffic. I'm in a lot of rural roads, so you have to pull out into these 55 or 65 mile an hour areas, and you really have to get in without, having somebody behind you slam on their brakes. And when you get off the line from a dead stop, there's nothing happening. It feels like you're driving a 90 horsepower car. And this is where you can't replace displacement. It doesn't have that inline six instantaneous takeoff feel. It doesn't have the V6 feel at all. And as a side effect, I don't get a lot of confidence getting off the line in this. And in fact, I often find myself being a lot more careful than I need to be. And the only remedy to it is to hold the brake with your left foot and bring up the revolutions of the engine with your right foot to get the motor going a little bit, to get the turbo spooled up, and then you will peg off the line very fast. But it's annoying, and it's one of the biggest deficiencies of this four-cylinder on most of the BMWs I've driven. But, I think it's a mixed bag between the ride quality and the performance. There's too much compromise here for this price point. And, the interior comfort's good, the wind noise is very well controlled. I mean, there's a lot of quality on the interior space. I don't know. Let's get to the final thoughts. Final thoughts on the X4. And the best way I'm going to sum this up, it's not for everyone. And it's not trying to be for everyone. I feel like this is that experiment that manufacturers do that says, we have all this data. We have a slight hole over here, and we have the money to fill it. let's put this model in between all of them. And that's what you see BMW doing. You have an X1, X2, X3, X4, X5. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And me and Exhaust Sports Auto, Kevin, were joking around how all they need to do now is add a decimal point system in between all those so they can fill in the X gaps with 0.5, 0.6. And I feel like this is where the X4 suffers the most. It has an identity crisis. It's trying to be a coupe, it's trying to be a sedan, a crossover, an SUV, and that's why I couldn't really connect with it. I don't know what it's trying to do. But there are some good things that BMW does. The interior space. They know how to blend comfort, security, the feel of control with physical controls. Your electronic systems on the car work great. Your HUD, your infotainment's good. There's a great use of physical buttons and knobs where you need it. This is the highlight of it. When you're not looking at the outside and you're spending your time on the interior, they do it great. The cargo capacity is pretty good. It's a mix, again, between a sedan and a hatchback, like a CUV, but not really. Overall driving dynamics, great transmission. No other way to put it. The engine, despite it, having some eco roots, it's tuned great. It feels smooth all the time. And the only issue is getting off the line. The handling, well, it feels much like the X3 did. This is one of the better parts of it. Dynamically, it feels very rear-wheel drive. It's got almost a 50-50 weight distribution, but because it's raised up, you feel, once you start pushing it through turns, you still feel its weight. You feel it start to roll over. You feel like there's too much body roll when you're driving it hard, which makes no sense because when you're driving it every day, it's vastly too firm. And I think if I was going to have two major negatives, it's ride quality and kind of exterior proportions, and the best part, transmission, engine, interior appointments. So take that for what it's worth. Hopefully this was helpful, and I'll see you next video.
This savage geese, I hate him, I'm gonna show you how to get back at him on Yelp and all that other stuff.